Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the SFEMB District 6 Candidate Forum. We invited the two candidates to return their questionnaires. Thank you very much for being here, Supervisor Matt Dorsey, Chair Honey Mahogany. I am doing the quick welcome intro, and then I will be doing timekeeping. I will now pass it off to Jane Natoli, who will be our moderator for this forum. Go ahead, Jane.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. So we're going to be asking a series of questions to both the candidates here. Thank you for coming on behalf of all the other folks at SFEMB. Truly a team effort putting this on. I am now going to throw it over. We'll start with Supervisor Matt Dorsey for a brief introduction, and then we will hear from Chair Mahogany, and then we'll get going.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say thank you to YIMBY and to everybody who puts this on. And I know that during endorsement season, it's a small part of my time and Honey's time, and there's a lot of work that people sit all day and do all the planning for this. And I just want to express my appreciation to the people who do the important work of informing voters and making our democracy vibrant. My political career, or at least career in public service in San Francisco, began in my first role out of college. I worked for the district attorney of San Francisco when he was running for state attorney general. And then the following year in 1991, I managed his reelection campaign in San Francisco. I had the opportunity to work in his office for a year. During that time, I worked on the hate crimes task force that he did in his office. I spent a number of years working as a political consultant and advocating for LGBTQ+ rights. I worked in 25 states, and I was also an advocate early on HIV and AIDS issues. For 14 years, I worked in the San Francisco City Attorney's Office, and in that role, I had an opportunity to have a front row seat to much of the performative politics and dysfunction that plays out in politics in City Hall, where I serve right now on the Board of Supervisors. And I think it's no accident that people like State Senator Scott Wiener and Attorney General Rob Bonta came out of that office. I consider myself part of that lineage, along with Vice President Kamala Harris and some very capable state and federal judges. I'm somebody who is principled. I will always have the courage of my convictions. I will let people know where I stand. And you can count on me that when I'm going to stand there, that's where I'm going to be, and I'm going to be a straight shooter about it. So I welcome the opportunity to take these questions, and I again appreciate everybody, including you, Honey, for taking part, and I'm looking forward to a lively debate.
Thank you, Supervisor. And Chair Mahogany?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want you all to know that for me, housing is not only essential, but it's very personal. I represent a lot of communities who are deeply impacted by the housing crisis. Refugees, trans people, and Black people, all who have been severely impacted by the lack of housing being built in the San Francisco and really the entire Bay Area. I grew up on the West Side along with about 30 of my family members, but today, virtually all 30 of them have left. It's a shame that families like mine, countless other families who once lived here in San Francisco have been pushed out due to, frankly, anti-housing and racist, classist, and discriminatory housing policies that have governed San Francisco planning for far too long. That's why I chose to take a leadership role in housing and in land use in the District 6 office. For years, I fought to build 9,000 units of housing. I fought to get 469 Stevenson built. I have fought this hard because we are in a crisis. The housing element will require that we build 80,000 units in the next 8 years. And if we want to ensure to have enough housing for all people, that includes people of all races and demographics in our city, then we will need to triple our current production rate. This is a crisis, and a crisis is not something you can leave to chance. It requires unity and innovation, and experience matters. Across the years of investing in building bridges between communities and labor and developers, and also YIMBY, innovation and proposing radical new legislation that won't just build one home, but accelerates production so that we can build many homes and meet our RHNA goals. This is the work I feel really passionately about. It's the work I've been doing, and I'm excited to discuss more of this with all of you and look forward to the ongoing conversation.
Thank you, Chair Mahogany. I did the really official thing earlier and flipped a coin, and it came up with Chair Mahogany for the first question. So that's where I'm going to start, and I'm going to alternate with each question going forward from here. So to get us started, you led with a little bit of this, but tell us why you believe you're the most pro-housing candidate in this race.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to define what it is. What is a pro-housing supervisor? And that's someone who is a pro-housing legislator. And I have experience working on legislation like A Place for All, which I actually worked on with Supervisor Mandelman's office. And I also supported the original fourplex legislation. It means also, though, that you're an organizer who has a long-standing relationship, not just with other politicians, but with residents and organizations like the Leather District and SOMCAN and United Playas and more. It really means that you're a negotiator who can stand up against NIMBYism, even if it costs you votes and endorsements. Again, I fought for 469 Stevenson and the Embarcadero Navigation Center, and I've endorsed the Affordable Homes Now ballot measures. And it means that I'm willing to build housing. You know, my opponent has been in politics for 20 years and spent his time, writing press releases for people like Joe Manchin and SFPD while I was leading land use in Supervisor Haney's office. I stand by my record. And while my opponent voted to block thousands of units of housing during his tenure on the DCCC, where he opposed, for example, or where he supported the mission moratorium and voted against
Thank
housing
you.
again.
Well, let you finish this thought.
Housing.
All right, thank you. I want to just be mindful of time here and give you both equal time here. Supervisor Dorsey, tell us why you believe you're the most pro-housing candidate in this race.
Sure. So I think I'm the most pro-housing candidate in this race because I'm the most pro-housing member of the Board of Supervisors right now. And I've already taken forceful positions and taken brave votes in less than 4 months. And I can guarantee you'll see more of those if I hold this seat and get to serve for the next 4 years. I'm the most pro-housing candidate in this race because I supported Affordable Homes Now right out of the gate. And because I didn't equivocate when the opportunity came to vote against Connie Chan's measure that would have killed Affordable Homes Now and might if it succeeds, if it gets more votes than Affordable Homes Now, unlike my opponent. In fact, I actually added Affordable Homes Now to my ballot statement at a time when we weren't sure that it was going to have enough signatures. That's how committed I am to that ballot measure and how central it is to the kind of supervisor I intend to be. So I'm looking forward to a lively debate and having the opportunity to talk more about why I'm so pro-housing.
Thank you. On that note, let's talk a little bit more about what you might do then. If elected, what will be your top legislative priority for housing, Supervisor Dorsey?
Sure. So I would say the top priority has to be fulfilling the promise of the housing element, the six-cycle housing element, which I consider to be the most important and progressive policy endeavor undertaken in San Francisco during my career. And I don't think it's just about housing. I think this is about righting the wrongs of history that exclusionary zoning and redlining have done to communities of color, what the San Francisco Chronicle called the San Francisco Bay Area's gift to American racism, and finally making progress to remedy disparities in intergenerational wealth that have persisted for far too long. If you had asked me 5 years ago, what is the most important work I've done in my career, I would have said marriage equality, and working on that for 9 years. If you ask me now, I might say probably 21st century police reform, working with Chief of Police Bill Scott on that. But if you ask me by the end of my second term, I think it's going to be fulfilling the promise of the housing element, which is going to right the wrongs of history and really achieve what a progressive city, the city of St. Francis, should be doing on housing.
Thank you. And same question to you, Chair Mahogany. If elected, what will be your top legislative priority for housing?
Well, I agree. Our housing element must be our #1 priority right now. I don't think that there's anyone out here who could look at our city's proposed plan and actually believe we're going to get to 80,000 units in 8 years. So when we're building 3,000 a year, we need to ramp things up. And gone is the day that we used to have, that we could afford to do one by one approvals for housing. We need broad reforms. And the answer is sitting right in front of us because we've done this already. The biggest acceleration in housing in our city over the last 2 decades has come from our Eastern Neighborhood Plan, Western Soma Plan, and Market Octavia Plan. We need area plans, not single project approvals. And once elected, I will sponsor the citywide neighborhood plan, legislation requiring every district to have an upzoning plan by 2024 to streamline, upzone, and increase zoned capacity. And this will build on the momentum of Affordable Homes Now. And I look forward to working together with you on this measure.
Thanks. So you both mentioned something that's on everybody's mind, the housing elements. Earlier this month, state officials rejected a draft of that housing element that we submitted as San Francisco. And state law says that we need to have a realistic plan to accommodate 82,069, because I know someone's going to ask me to be specific, homes this decade. So that's to be eligible for affordable housing grants. What will you do as D6 Supervisor, Chair Mahogany, to fix this situation?
Well, I'm committed to upzoning neighborhoods and streamlining CEQA to ensure by right development, but equally important is also permitting. In our most recent housing element, the state called us on our bullshit, and the fact that no developer will build a 4-plex or even a 10-plex in San Francisco right now is ridiculous. The average time for a project is over 2 years, which violates our Permit Streamlining Act. We frankly can't build anything less than 24 stories because of impact fees, lengthy approvals, corruption, and mismanagement. And to solve this, I will be prioritizing solving our permitting problem. I will create a housing ombudsman board with the authority to set production targets every year based on our RENA goals, setting minimum standards to match the Permit Streamlining Act, and importantly, have the authority to find and cut any red tape and permits and fees necessary. By eliminating this red tape at DBI and planning, we can actually reduce the time and cost of development and increase fees. Working and vetting with YIMBY members and labor leaders, we will be able to actually get to our housing element and get it into compliance.
Thank you. And Supervisor Dorsey, what do you think the D6 supervisor can do to fix the situation as it relates to the next housing element?
What you're going to see me do more of as supervisor is reflecting the imperatives of core 4 priorities of zoning reform, process reform, making sure that we're getting adequate funding and removing the kind of perverse incentives that too often stymie rather than shape progress. I can also tell you what I've already done as a supervisor, and that's, right after the state lowered the boom, I think this is probably the opening salvo of more things to come. I went to the planning department right away, and I asked the planning department to report back to me to explore how the local versions of SB 10 and SB 50 would help us get to the 82,000 RENA floor targets that we need. I can make sure that I'm willing to take the brave votes whenever necessary, like opposing the once well-intended 4-plex legislation that was a step in the wrong direction. And I think you're going to find me, after 14 years in the city attorney's office, having a front row seat to the kind of dysfunction. I think you can count on me to be the person who's going to call it out and do the right thing.
Thank you. Building off of that, District 6 is already a model of this dense multifamily housing. You've both mentioned it. We would love to see that exist in all corners of the city, not just in Soma. So Supervisor Dorsey, how will you hold your colleagues' feet to the fire to ensure that housing comes to all of San Francisco, especially the wealthier West Side, where I'm coming to you live right now?
Yeah, so it's a good question, but I think it's actually, it is a part to influence colleagues, but I think it's also being the Cassandra on what the reality is of state law. The legislature and the governor have made a decision that the housing crisis is going to be solved with or without local governments. And I think while I will try to work cooperatively to make progress with colleagues, the reality is that if we don't make progress, we're going to risk the loss of funding for affordable housing, for transit, and possibly the loss of local control altogether. My first speech as a District 6 supervisor, I said that this is the District 6 supervisor, at least to how I'm going to be a supervisor, has to be more than just a reliable vote. I have to be the conscience of housing on the Board of Supervisors, because if we lose funding for housing and for transit, my district is going to be hurt the most. That means that I have to push every one of my colleagues to build housing and do the right thing in their districts as well. That's just reflecting the reality of the law.
Thank you. Chair Mahogany, how would you hold your colleagues' feet to the fire in this regard and ensuring that we're building homes in all corners of San Francisco?
Well, look, I'll be the first to say this. The era of supervisorial prerogative is over. After 469 Stevenson, it's really clear to me that things have fundamentally changed in the way that we are approving housing. And honestly, we shouldn't have as much of a say. I mean, hundreds of units of housing should not be used as a political leverage point in the middle of a housing crisis. I have a demonstrated track record of standing up for things that are right. I supported car-free JFK against the supervisor of that district. I stood up for the Embarcadero Navigation Center against opposition. And I've taken tough stands on transportation transportation infrastructure like congestion pricing on Treasure Island. After 3 years of studies and meetings, we did the work to ensure the toll was not regressive and had exemptions for low-income residents. We need the toll to ensure we don't have chaos on our bridge. And to me, it's clear that the toll is morally and civically responsible thing to do, even if it's unpopular. And that's in stark contrast to my opponent who openly opposes the toll, throwing out 3 years of transportation studies in the second month on the job. I don't think that's responsible. I have years of taking principled stands, even when it's cost me politically, and I'm going to keep doing that.
Thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, I don't think we've really quite hit on this piece, but San Francisco is currently seeing the market for our housing projects crash. It's very hard to build. I don't think I have to tell anybody that. One of the major costs comes from city law, which requires a percentage of housing projects to be set aside for below market rate units. Chair Mahogany, is the set aside rate for BMR units too high, too low, just right? And when is it appropriate for politicians to demand that a housing project exceeds the city's minimum rates?
Well, I think that the way that we do BMR is just completely screwed up. I mean, we need to rework the whole framework because I strongly believe we need affordable housing for sure, and that the 23% BMR rate that we currently have, I mean, I think it made sense for the housing market back then, but now it's clear that things have changed, costs have gone up, and above all, we really need to take a close look at feasibility. So I believe in certain neighborhoods, we probably will need to lower the BMR percentage, but in other neighborhoods, there is potential actually to maybe even raise them higher. And that's why, in my proposed citywide neighborhood plan, we'll be taking a look at sort of how we can vary that, what is feasible, and how we can weigh the factors to make sure that we're doing this the right way.
Thank you. Supervisor Dorsey, same question here. Do you think our BMR units are too high, too low, just right?
Sure. So generally speaking, I think inclusionary rate is just right until it isn't. And I think the uncomfortable truth, given that what we are seeing with the projects, the number of housing projects not getting started, is that we may, when we're seeing new housing projects plummet, we need to take a hard look at what we can control. There's a lot we can't control in housing, obviously, construction costs, COVID, supply chain. But the things that we can control is our inclusionary rate. And we have an obligation, if we're going to be serious about meeting these, the aggressive targets that we have, is to make the difficult decisions, as I have made. And I would say, that I know that when it comes to the toll and other things that aren't popular, I stand by that. I don't think a toll there's any universal that's called progressive tolling structure. And I think Chair Mahogany was also against SB 50, which I think was some of the most important policymaking on housing we can have.
Thank you. All right, let's just go to a completely non-controversial topic here: rent control. So rent control is a powerful tool to stabilize neighborhoods for vulnerable tenants and prevent displacement, right? But when rent control policies are poorly designed, they can also make it less likely that housing projects are financially viable. How do we achieve our goals of both creating housing abundance and protecting renters, Supervisor Dorsey?
Sure. So I'm a renter, and I have the benefit of living in an apartment that has rent stabilization. In fact, I live at Trinity Place, where we have rent stabilization by agreement. This is part of the development agreement. This is post-1979 rent stabilization. So for me, rent stabilization means that I have the security of knowing that I get to retire in my chosen neighborhood, in a city I love, where I choose not to own a car and have a high quality public realm, the kind of urbanist environment that I want to live in. Right now, I'm working with the city attorney on a proposal that would expand rent control as an affordability option for developers in Home SF, our local density bonus program. And I think rent stabilization means stable communities and enables people to stay in the city where they belong, and not encounter, given the vicissitudes of the economy that sometimes happen in San Francisco, a rent increase that is tantamount to an eviction notice. If we're responsible about housing, I think we have to be responsible about rent stabilization as well.
Thank you. Chair Mahogany, how do we achieve our goals of housing abundance and protecting renters?
Well, I agree with Supervisor Dorsey here. We absolutely must ensure rent control to protect renters, but we also can focus on abolishing exclusionary zoning practices to increase the abundance of housing. I mean, I agree, rent control does have a small cost of development, but actually there are studies from Stanford that show that rent control also reduces displacement by 20%, a huge portion more than that. And so you cannot put a price on that. You can't put a price on the fact that my family members and many members of the communities here in San Francisco that are still here, they could be displaced from San Francisco without rent control. If we actually want to make housing projects feasible, let's focus on some of the larger root causes. Again, zoning and permitting. UC Berkeley studies show that increased zoned capacity increases housing permits issued by 30%. And as a result, a 5 to 7% reduction in the in rent that's something that we can deal with.
Thank you. Chair Mahogany, I'll start with you on this one. So these are all great ideas. I love hearing from both of you on these things. But how do we expand the pro-housing coalition? How will you do that? What voters or groups are you uniquely positioned to bring into the pro-housing movement?
Well, to make real progress on housing, I think we definitely need to build bridges between progressives and moderates for sure, and also labor and YIMBY movements. Nationally, we have AOC and Warren, and locally here, we just had the 8017 race, which was really inspiring because we did have a pro-housing progressive candidate that won. And I want to continue that forward. I, in the last 2 months, have rallied over 1,000 people to my campaign events from across communities, from politics to nonprofits and small businesses, nightlife and labor, and integrating all of them together into a pro-housing movement. So I've gathered over 50 endorsements from YIMBY legislators like Alex Lee to labor unions like Local 21 and advocacy orgs like Smart Justice. It's a testament to that coalition that I'm building, that our housing ombudsman board plan was actually developed with both YIMBY and labor leaders at the table. And that's the kind of bridge builder I want to be. That's the kind of progressive supervisor I want to be, a pro-housing supervisor that stands with all of those groups and communities.
Thank you, Supervisor Dorsey. Similarly, how will you expand the pro-housing coalition, and what groups are you uniquely positioned to bring into the pro-housing movement?
Okay. Well, my first job in local politics, as I mentioned, was managing the district attorney's reelection campaign when I was 26 years old. I have been around in local politics, actually politics in general, going back to when I was 10 years old, when I was volunteering in campaigns. And if I've learned one thing about politics, and especially in San Francisco politics, is that if you're going to have the courage of your convictions, if you're going to have convictions, it's important to have the courage of your convictions. I am somebody who has been able to look people in the eye and say that I disagree with them on things, and then continue to work with them on other things where we do agree. And one of the things that was disappointing to me is when I came out strongly for affordable homes now, Chair Mahogany took the position of abstaining on the competing measure whose success would kill affordable homes now. I think that's something that ultimately helps one lose the trust of the people, the coalitions you're trying to build. I would rather understand that we have state laws that are going to change things with or without us. And I want to be a leader on ways that we can lead rather than follow.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we've covered a lot here, but one other thing that we haven't touched on came up again today on Twitter. Maybe you saw it, but this year YIMBY Action co-sponsored California Assembly Bill 2053, the California Social Housing Bill. That unfortunately died in committee. The bill was by Assembly member Alex Lee, and it proposed to build publicly owned homes for people of all income levels. Supervisor Dorsey, will you work to create a local version of that program in San Francisco? What is your vision for abundant housing for low-income families in San Francisco?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we need to be creative about our approaches to social housing. I was supported AB 2053, and I was disappointed that it failed. I would be in favor of land banking, and I think there are creative approaches and a lot of ideas that we should be pursuing to separate housing from profit motives and have publicly owned housing. I will be candid, much of what we're talking about here when it comes to what we do locally and what the Board of Supervisors does makes me suspicious of our local government's ability to do what I think we probably could do a better job of at the state level. Given the current makeup of the board right now, I am, I'm hopeful, but suspicious. I think I'm hopeful in that the reality is going to start to dawn on people, as it certainly dawned on me, that we're going to do this. Hopefully we'll have local control, but if we can't, we might lose local control. So I will be a part of that, and that includes for social housing.
Thank you. Chair Mahogany, what's your vision for abundant housing for low-income San Franciscans, and will you work to create a version of social housing locally in San Francisco?
Absolutely. Well, as Chief of Staff for the former District 6 Supervisor, I've been working on abundant housing for low-income families for many, many years. I've directly supported the creation, actually, of land trusts in San Francisco. I've worked to identify and preserve rent-controlled units and pushed for the acquisition of large multi-unit buildings in our district. And I also made sure that we acquired buildings to make sure that we provided 100% affordable housing and supportive housing, including at the Panoramic on 9th Street, buildings on 12th Street and throughout SoMa. I actually supported and worked on the acquisition of 285 Turk, creating 40 permanently affordable units of housing there. I've been advocating for social housing for years, which is why I have been endorsed by Assembly Member Alex Lee himself, as well as Assembly Member Haney. I will continue to partner with Lee and Haney on fighting for this and making sure that we not just do it at the state, but also locally. And we can totally empower the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to do this work. We actually fundamentally need to expand our housing modes and all the different types of housing that we do here in San Francisco. And I am 100% for social housing.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit here. So those were the same questions for each of you. These are some questions, some of which one came from the audience, that are more geared towards individual questions. I'm going to start with you, Chair Mahogany. We've touched on this a little bit. This has come up, but like Supervisor Dorsey, you supported Affordable Homes Now, Proposition D, on the November 2022 ballot. That's the YIMBY-sponsored streamlining measure. But your stance on Proposition E, Supervisor Connie Chan's competing measure that won't actually build housing, seems further apart. Even though Prop E contains a poison pill that will preempt Prop D, you abstained from an endorsement vote on Prop E for the San Francisco Democratic Party. At the same time, you did answer our candidate questionnaire saying that you opposed Prop E. Why did you take these two positions, which seem at odds with one another?
Well, look, I unequivocally do support Affordable Homes Now, and I do oppose the other measure. And, let's be clear, an abstention is not a yes vote by any means on the Democratic Party. It's also not the same as voting yes at the DCCC for the mission moratorium, as Supervisor Dorsey did. And it's not the same as voting yes at the DCCC alongside Compost and others on every NIMBY housing resolution ever sponsored, like Supervisor Dorsey did. So make no mistake, I have helped build 9,000 units of housing in our district. I am pro-housing. My record shows that because I've actually built it.
Well, Supervisor Dorsey, that leads us naturally into our next question, which has come up here. You were a member of the DCCC, right, the San Francisco Democratic Party Central Committee, for 3 years. And in that time, you voted to endorse David Campos and John Avalos. They were not necessarily the most pro-housing supervisors we've had, to put it lightly. You also voted to endorse the no on the wall on the waterfront that downsized a chunk of the area of the Embarcadero. And as has mentioned, you voted for the mission moratorium. Can you explain your thinking in those votes on this?
Sure. So, when I came in on the Democratic County Central Committee, I was part of the progressive slate, and there's a lot of things that social justice issues and fighting for tenants and things that I agreed with John Avalos and David Campos on, and probably still do. I will say that this was an era where people like David Chu was the leading person who it was his district, and he was asking colleagues to oppose the wall on the waterfront. My view of, in fact, I actually would invite people to read the San Francisco Examiner op-ed I wrote about this. But one of the things that I felt about the Democratic Party's role is, if we are going to be a Democratic Party, we should be a small d Democratic Party and respect the rights of, or the what would be prerogative of elected officials speaking from their district. This was an era before that was, before the real urgency set in. But I took the position London Breed took, and I took the position David Chu took.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Coming back to you, Chair Mahogany, in past elections, you have not agreed with SFUMB on endorsing candidates at times. For example, you previously endorsed Jackie Fielder over Scott Wiener for State Senate, or Dean Preston over Valley Brown in District 5. How can SFUMB members be sure that you will reliably support pro-housing positions and candidates in the future?
Well, I do actually want to set that record straight. When Valley Brown was appointed, I did actually support her against Dean Preston. So I just want to be clear about that. But also, as was said earlier, I think we have both supported progressive candidates in the past. But we do evolve and we change over time. But I think what the question here is, who's going to be the biggest housing advocate going forward? Who has the record? Who's able to build the bridges to actually make that happen? And I think that my record speaks for itself. Again, I fought for the Embarcadero Navigation Center against NIMBYism. I fought for 469 Stevenson against the majority of the board, and I am endorsing AHN, against the majority of the board again. So, unlike my opponent, I am fighting against the Chan and Peskin effort to eliminate our Department of Sanitation and Streets. So I'm fine standing up to progressives when they're wrong. I have been getting housing built in this district for years while my opponent was, running interference for the police. So again, I have a track record that shows that I can build housing. I have coalitions built and I'm ready to get to work.
Thank you. It's like you two are doing my job for me. You're leading me into the next question. Supervisor Dorsey, I mentioned your work with the San Francisco Police Department. You were the director of strategic communications there. You were doing PR for the department that has been rocked by a number of racial discrimination scandals in recent years. YIMBY's fight for abundant housing to end practices of racial segregation and discrimination. So why should YIMBYs trust you to fight on behalf of social justice through housing policy in light of your previous work for SFPD?
Sure. So in 2019, I was interviewing with actually several city departments when I was exploring a return to local government. And when an opportunity presented itself to work with Chief of Police Bill Scott, whom I consider to be the most enlightened and progressive police chief in America today, I jumped at the opportunity. I spent many years, as we talked about, in the city attorney's office, and I was there when San Francisco had its local version of George Floyd in 2015 and 2016 with officer-involved shootings like Mario Woods. The department was going off the rails. Ed Lee chose a new chief of police after a national search, and it was Bill Scott. And the work that he has been doing to lead reforms, 21st century police reforms over the last 5 or 6 years has been important. And I think it was especially important after the murder of George Floyd at a time when 18,000 police departments are doing the work and need to do the work that San Francisco has been doing. There's still work to be done, but I had the opportunity to evangelize police reform at a time when this country needs it, and I'm proud of that.
Thank you. I appreciate both of those. Want to go back, want to make sure we're hitting some of our good audience questions here. So this is another one for both of you. And I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Chair Mahogany. Sequential permitting steps delay housing projects. We all know there's a lot. This has come up in some of what we've heard from both of you today. What is within your control as a supervisor? What can be done to increase the throughput of these approvals and unblock some of that?
Absolutely. I think I actually answered some of this earlier, which is, I do want to create an ombudsman program so that we can actually simplify our permitting process, because there's no reason that we should have to have permit expediters in order to get through a city process that should be pretty pro forma, especially when, the housing, if it can meet all our requirements. So I'm absolutely committed to making sure that we do permitting reform to clean up that red tape and make housing feasible to build, even if it's not 24 stories. Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Thank you. Supervisor Dorsey, same question, right? What is within your control as a supervisor? What can be done to increase that throughput of approvals and streamline this process?
Yeah, I regret to say, even as a member of the Board of Supervisors, that I think we're at a time when we need to take more power away from the Board of Supervisors. And I think that's what Affordable Homes Now is. That's what we're talking about with streamlining. And I think that's one of the issues that, there was a question I didn't get to answer about the inclusionary housing rate. I don't think this is something that belongs with the Board of Supervisors. I think this is something that, given we're already struggling with uncertainties about the economy, we can't put housing, what we need to do to meet our aggressive housing goals in the hands of the vicissitudes of politics. I think this kind of thing is rightfully in play in the hands of somebody like the city controller or the city's chief economist, Ted Egan. That's who should be making those kinds of decisions, where we should just be taking power, especially discretionary power that is too often stymied production, away from the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We got another good question from the audience. You've touched on lots of ways about what housing abundance could potentially look like in San Francisco. But I'll go ahead and start with you, Chair Mahogany here. What metrics would you track for measuring success or failure of housing policy? What does that look like?
Absolutely. Well, effective housing policy means that housing is being built, and clearly we're not building enough, quickly enough, fast enough, or affordable enough here in San Francisco. So, we need to streamline housing for housing at all levels so that we can grow the, how much housing we actually get built every year, so we can meet our RHNA goals, so we can actually have a housing element that is in compliance. So, yeah, if we can build housing, then it's working, and if we can't and we're not keeping up, then it's not.
That is a fair way of putting it. Supervisor Dorsey, similarly, what metrics do you think we should be tracking as a city to measure success or failure of our housing policy?
I think if we are to fulfill the promise of the 6th cycle housing element, the metrics we should be looking at is if we're making progress in the right direction on racial disparities and socioeconomic inequality. This is the thing that, to me, makes the housing element the most important, most progressive kind of thing that we're going to be doing over the next 8 years. And it's not lost on me that, if I get 2 terms to serve on the Board of Supervisors, as I hope I will, it's going to coincide exactly with the housing element. So what I want to look at is making sure that the staggering wealth disparities right now among traditionally marginalized communities that far outpace what a state that's not good at this and a country that's not good at this. That's the metric where we are going to decide whether we have actually fulfilled the promise of what the housing element endeavors to do. This is going to be the most important work of my career. I'm really excited to get to work on it, but I need the 4 years to do it, and I hope I get it.
Thank you. Building off of that, another great audience question that adds on to that. The economic future of San Francisco's downtown, which includes SOMA, especially when we think about offices and thus the city, is in question due to the rise in remote work. How would you keep downtown SF vibrant? Start with you, Supervisor Dorsey. How would you think about adapting existing buildings and streets to the city's needs?
So one of the things, as we are coming out economically or trying to, of the COVID lockdown, the downturn, San Francisco is struggling. One of the things that I've heard most from small businesses is that, well, they hung on during COVID, but nobody's coming, the big companies aren't coming back to work. One of the things that I'm willing to have a conversation about and that I've been asking some of the large companies about is, we have a gross receipts tax that does incentivize people to work remotely. I'm willing to do the brave work of picking that fight and having a tax conversation if that'll get people back to work. But one of the other things that I'm starting to do is I'm going to reach out to the department. We're actually in the process of pulling together a letter for the Department of Building Inspection to ask about commercial housing and residential housing and what would we be able to do if we were to look at some of the commercial high rises and converting that to housing. It would be a big lift in terms of the commercial to residential business code building code, but it's something that we're looking at.
Thank you. Chair Mahogany, similarly, how would you keep downtown SF vibrant, and what are your thoughts on adapting existing buildings and streets to our current needs, since they seem to be changing?
Well, this is something that I've worked extensively on, both as Chief of Staff to Supervisor Haney, but also, as a small business owner. I'm a small business owner in the district, and I know to return. We need conventions to return. And that's why I worked so hard on things like clean streets and making sure that our businesses also receive the funding they needed to be able to stay alive through the pandemic. But I have said from the beginning, after debate, that what we need to do is convert that office space, which frankly is not coming back and wasn't sustainable in the first place, into housing. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we are building housing where we had office space. We need vibrant, thriving communities that don't leave at 5 p.m. and leave a ghost town. We need a vibrant community where we have protected bike lanes and wider sidewalks, pedestrian scrambles, bulb outs. Those are all things that I implemented throughout SOMA. That's a fight that I'm going to continue to have as supervisor of the district. I'm going to build more housing, more densely, and support our small businesses.
Moving into our next and final section here, I'm going to have a few quick fire questions. These are meant to be pretty quick response. We're not looking for the 1-minute answers here. So I'll start with you, Chair Mahogany. Here's your opportunity to pander to the audience. Do you identify as a YIMBY?
Well, look, I mean, okay, so Elizabeth Warren, I'm a Warren Democrat, and she identifies as a YIMBY. So if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me too.
Thank you. Supervisor Dorsey?
Yeah, I identify as a YIMBY, and I have joined YIMBY, and I'm proud of that, and it's a good place to be right now, especially in District 6. I think this is the YIMBY district.
I'll start with you for this one, Supervisor Dorsey. Has San Francisco built too much, the right amount, or too little market rate housing? Supervisor Dorsey?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was too little, and I think too little, and I think that is my apologies. I was waiting for you, honey. I didn't hear it.
No, I was alternating. Sorry, I'm trying to keep it moving.
No, I think just looking at the RENA targets of 82,069 units over the next 8 years, there's aggressive targets for all of it. But yeah, we need more housing, more market rate housing, all kinds of housing.
Chair Mahogany?
We build too damn little of everything, including market rate.
All right. Should all zoning, I'll start with you on this one, Chair Mahogany. Should all zoning and code compliant housing be approved by right, full stop?
Yes.
All right, no explanation needed. Supervisor Dorsey?
Yes.
Excellent, you're my most receptive audience yet. I appreciate it. This one we'll do a little bit differently, so please raise your hand for each of the following 3 proposals that I am going to put out there. Afterwards, you'll have some time to explain your positions. So we'll move with the first one here. First, allowing code compliant fourplexes on all residential lots without further amendments or restrictions.
Oh, it's just raise your hand.
I'll ask for thoughts a little bit further, but yes, appreciate that. Supervisor Dorsey, you have a little bit more to say about that one?
I think, I mean, this was, it was too bad that we had to come out and I had to be one of the people to sustain the veto against a well-intended fourplex legislation, but it was the amendments and restrictions that made it into a step in the wrong direction, and I was proud to be against it. Chair
Mahogany?
Yeah, we need to build, when we come up with legislation, it needs to be feasible. It actually needs to lead to the production of housing. So I don't think that the final result of the fourplex legislation did that, but good effort. But we can't afford to have, legislation that's not going to build housing.
Same thing again, raise your hand and then I'll ask you for a little bit more from each of you. So next, fully opting into California's Senate Bill 10 to allow 10 plexes on any residential lot.
Yep.
Okay, I'll start with you this time, Chair Mahogany. Anything to add to that? Anything else we should be doing there?
No, I mean, I think that we absolutely need to build as densely as possible. So where we can build denser than that, great. But we need to start providing some floors. Supervisor
Dorsey?
Yeah, I mean, when the HCD letter came out, like I said, one of the first things I asked planning to look at is report back on what we could do with SB 10. I realize politically right now, and for the board, if we can't do fourplexes, how are we going to be talking 10 plexes? But mark my word, this is the first of many salvos from the state, and within 2 or 3 years, we're going to be talking about SB 10, and we're going to be talking about 10 plexes.
Okay. I appreciate that. And last but not least, our spiciest one we saved for last, of course, we got to work our way up. So raise your hand if you would support enacting a local version of Senate Bill 50, allowing by right permitting of housing projects up to building heights of 5 stories near major transit stops or in well-resourced neighborhoods.
No.
We're not catching either of you here. You're both here. So, Supervisor Dorsey, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, other than, why limit it to, I think there's places where we can go over 5 stories, but I think that that is something that I support. And I'm glad that, Chair Mahogany is going to be doing that, because it was my understanding that Chair Mahogany was against SB 50. But
Chair Mahogany, your opportunity to respond.
Well, absolutely. Like you, I have evolved on some positions, but unlike you, when I took that vote, I was very new, a little changeling. I have now since, just starting in politics, but it was actually doing the work that changed my mind. I spent the last 4 years doing the work of building housing, and actually doing that work showed me what was feasible and what wasn't, and also how important it was. So yes, I did vote against SB 50 in its original form. Again, I was just at first getting my start in politics. I didn't have the experience I have now, but after building 9,000 units of housing in the district I worked in, I believe that this is good legislation given the crisis we're in.
Thank you. So that concludes all of our questions. Appreciate you really getting in there. We love to hear these really nerdy, detailed answers, and I think you both provided a lot of material for people listening to think about and dig into. So I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes just to provide a closing statement. We'll start with Supervisor Dorsey and then go to Chair Mahogany, and then we'll come back to me and I'll close things out. So starting with you, Supervisor Dorsey.
great. Thanks. Thank you so much. And I just want to say thanks everybody for doing this and for hosting us. I think one of the reasons that I think I'm the most pro-housing supervisor or candidate in this race, and obviously I think I'm the most pro-housing supervisor. One of the other reasons that I didn't get to was that when I was making the decision about whether I even wanted to ask for this job, one of the earliest conversations that I had was with someone I worked with I've known for 20 years, and that's Scott Wiener. He is a friend and former city attorney colleague. He is somebody who is part of my brain trust, along with Annie Fryman and Corey Smith. I asked him his advice, and I said I was thinking about this. And I told him that if I did get this, and if I did go for it, that Scott Wiener would be the role model for me as the supervisor I intended to be. Scott told me he thought I would be a great supervisor. He respected that I have a backbone and have had a backbone, and he said he would support me. And candidly, if his response was anything less than that, I would probably not have asked for this. I mentioned earlier that I spent 14 years in the city attorney's office. I know it was probably the 2 years in the police department that got all the headlines. But I'm proud to work in an office that has done so much on housing. And if anybody doubts the work that I've done on housing over many years, I would ask you to go to sfcityattorney.org and do a word search for housing or tenant and see all the work that I did. When I'm as communications director, it's not just about writing, press releases, as Chair Mahogany said. It's actually about using the bully pulpit to send a message to the would-be slumlords and predatory landlords who are trying to push people out of their housing. I took a principled stand to fight Airbnb because it removed a category of housing for roommate situations that I think we should get back. So I'm proud of the work that I've done. I think I've already done a lot in 4 months. Give me 4 years and let me show you what a great supervisor can do. I'd be honored to have the YIMBY endorsement.
Thank you. Chair Mahogany.
Well, I've said this many times already, but we absolutely are in a crisis, and we need to meet the housing elements and our goals. We need to build 80,000 units of housing over the next 8 years. And after today's debate, I hope it's really clear who has the experience to do that. And by experience, I mean the independence, the track record, and the coalition to usher in a new age for building housing in San Francisco. We need someone who has done the work for years, building 9,000 units of housing. Yes, that was my work. Who's made tough choices on Stevenson and the Embarcadero and Affordable Homes Now, and who's pushed back against NIMBY voices in transportation. We don't need someone who blindly votes with those in power or people who they want to curry favor with, whether it be Supervisor Campos or the mayor. We don't need someone who calls themselves pro-housing when it's convenient, but doesn't have experience, especially when they have a long track record of anti-housing votes like the Mission Moratorium. Nor do we need someone who capitulates to loud voices against sound transportation policy. So please do compare our records, and the facts speak for themselves. But even more importantly, we need someone who can champion equity in housing. You can't be a champion for qualified immunity. You can't be for charging juveniles as adults and claim to be pro-equity. And if you're not pro-equity, you can't truly be pro-housing. Because we are in a crisis and we can't rely on fair weather politicians who pretend to understand housing. We don't need any more resolutions and fourplex vaporware. What we need is someone to radically reshape SF housing politics, someone who can bridge labor, progressives, and moderates and YIMBYs, someone with a vision for new ideas like our citywide neighborhood plan and housing ombudsman board. Let's prove progressive and pro-housing can work together as they do all over the rest of the country. I'm someone who can build bridges, someone who will bring more people to our side and bring more people over to saying yes to building in my backyard. And I would love to have your endorsement.
Thank you both. I really appreciate your time. I know there's a lot to do during a campaign season, but we really appreciate you taking the time to share your vision of what you would do if elected and why YIMBYs should support you. So really just want to say thank you. We can't do this without the great work of great candidates. And so thank you for making our job really easy. It's fun to put these things together. We're